Hello, welcome to Gardener's World. Now, it's Easter weekend, and for many of us, this is our first venture out into the garden, where we can take stock, start buying plants, planning, gardening, so that the garden will look as good as it possibly can in the months to come. Here in the damp garden at Longmeadow, I have done some work over winter, a bit of pruning, a bit of clearing and digging, but now is the time to start moving plants around, dividing some, putting in new ones, giving this part of Longmeadow a new burst of energy. This week, Rachel visits a garden centre to find out what are the trends this Easter.
Viburnums.
Been a trend very much for planting herbaceous perennials and wildflowers, and the more naturalistic look.
We get a masterclass in looking after one of our most popular houseplants, the orchid.
Probably where people go wrong the most is getting the watering balance right.
And Jo goes behind the scenes at one of the biggest growers of bedding plants in the country.
The thing about bedding is it's fun, it's not very expensive, and you can do anything you want with it.
The pond is coming into life in more ways than one. There's a little bit of growth coming, and it'd be quite nice to get in there with my waders and start to clean out, cut back the old foliage. And I was planning to do that, but I was halted by a sound. And that sound was the rumbling croak of scores of mating frogs. Music to somebody's ears, probably other mating frogs, but it means that if I get in there and splash about, I'm going to disturb them. And you do have to take on board that if you're going to have a pond that's occupied by wildlife, it does mean that you have to work around them rather than them working around you. And from the edge, I can start to take out leaves and things. And it's important to do that because if you have rotting vegetation in the water, that will decompose, that will enrich the water, and that will encourage algae later on in the year. In this border in the front, and you can see the Camasias are growing well, I've got just appearing hostas. I've got three main types, with Sibodiana, Summer's Substance, and Snowdon. And all three have got really big leaves. And over the last couple of years, they've suppressed other things like primulas that were planted in there. So what I want to do today is to move some, divide some, and actually start planting hostas around the back of the pond so we pick up that rhythm of foliage. And the time to do it is now. Any time when you start to see these bullet-like shoots appear. And this is also a very good time to divide and move any herbaceous perennial. And they're very easy to do. Right, out you come. There we go. Now, I have done this with an axe before now. You can do it with a bread knife, by the way. An old bread knife is probably more accurate. But I'm just going to chop like that. And there we go. And you can see the roots are cut clean. And if I replant that, I will get a big, healthy plant. I could divide that easily into two again if I wanted to space them out more. And I've got some compost in here and take them to their new home. I'm digging a much bigger hole than I need for the hosta itself because I want to put plenty of compost underneath it. Hostas are greedy, thirsty plants. So I'm going to give it every chance. This is garden compost, but manure will do. Anything that is rich and strong will hold moisture and feed the plant. Now we'll plant this at the same level it was in the ground, and then we can backfill around it. Last but absolutely not least, give it a really good drink, and I mean a proper soak. Now, although I haven't had to go shopping for these plants, the truth is that most of us will go shopping for plants at Easter time. Garden centres do a huge trade at this time of year. It's by far and away the busiest commercial period. And Rachel has been to a garden centre in the Cotswolds to see exactly what people are looking for this year.
know about you, but I love the Easter weekend. The chance to spend time with family, the warm spring days, mostly, and the gardening season starting in earnest, which of course for most of us means a trip to the garden centre. Every year, over 2/3 of British adults visit a garden centre. That's around 160 million visits, spending nearly £3 billion. And the Easter weekend is when it really all kicks off. But what I want to know is what exactly we're all going to be buying this year and how our gardens are going to look as a result. I've come to one of the country's most successful garden centres. Glenn Sheldrake is the horticultural director responsible for filling the place chock full with irresistible plants.
So this is the first thing I'd like to show you.
Viburnums.
Yes, so there's been a trend over the last few years, very much for planting herbaceous perennials and wildflowers, and the more naturalistic look. And what we're seeing is a tandem trend springing up for people that now realise that you also need structure and form in the garden. And we love viburnum because there are so many different types, and I particularly wanted to show you this one. This is Viburnum morisii Great Star. It has a great architectural form where you get layers of branches with just smothered in flowers, absolutely smothered in flowers in the spring, and then incredible autumn colour.
Do you know, I'm so pleased that you said this, because for me, this is what's been missing for the last few years. In fact, even longer than that. And I remember as a child, my father had lots of shrubs, Philadelphus, viburnums and so on. I'm so pleased. It's high time. So, what's coming next?
So, this is a trend that we've seen becoming more and more prevalent for using your garden as an extra room. And a lot of people have patios or decks, and that gives a lot of extra planting opportunities. So particularly for plants in pots, we've got a lovely rose here. This rose is high grove, which is a climber, so if you've got a pergola over your outdoor space, it grows to about 8 feet and has beautiful depth and intensity of colour. It's a red, and it's a really strong grower.
And I'm so glad you said rose as well. Always my top trend.
Well, roses come and go, but they're really back in fashion again at the moment. It's using your garden as another room. You can bring plants into that, and you can make those plants the central feature of your outdoor space.
I love that idea. Sort of whether you're out, you're in, it's all plants.
Absolutely.
On to top trend number 3, a magnolia. So again, sort of quite large structural plants.
There's no denying that the real joy of being a gardener is taking a seed or a tiny cutting and growing it into a large plant in your garden over a period of 10 to 20 years. But we see more and more people going for instant gardening, for buying large plants that give impact in the garden straight away. Take this Magnolia Susan as an example. You could wait a very large number of years for a magnolia to grow that size, but by putting that into your garden straight away, you've got something instant, and it has great colour, great form.
I can see why that's so appealing, but then how much is this? Let's have a little look. That's £115.
It is.
It's quite a big investment, isn't it?
It is, but of course we sell, as all other garden centres do, much smaller versions of the same. And so there's something to fit everybody's budget.
Well, I can see that. It's certainly very seductive. I'm so glad that Glenn said that he thought shrubs were due for a resurgence, and they've certainly given this group of lilacs a really prominent place here on the nursery. We've got Souvenir de Louis Spaeth over there, and that's the one I think that's really caught my eye. Glenn's final tip for what he thinks is going to be really big this year is for plants with instant impact. And just walking around the nursery, it occurred to me that I think the instant impact is also here in these conifers. I love this, for example, this Cryptomeria, and this is £35, and I think that definitely creates instant impact. I'd be happy to have any of these in my garden.
Whether you're planning to buy an instant effect, expensive plant or just a tray of bedding, do remember that garden centres are not open on Easter Sunday except in Scotland, or at least most of them aren't. Now, Easter is traditionally the time when people planted potatoes. But it's very early this year and the ground is very cold and I shan't be planting my potatoes for a while yet. There's no point unless the ground is warm to touch. However, you can start by growing some in a container, and if you don't have a garden or an allotment, it's a good way to grow potatoes and be able to have that delicious taste that you just cannot buy of new potatoes freshly harvested. You grow them in any kind of container. You can buy specialist ones like this, and the important thing is it's got drainage holes in the bottom. If you use a bag, it's got to be strong enough to be able to lift it up without tearing, full of soil. You can grow them in a dustbin, you can grow them in a big flower pot, you can have any kind of bag or container and it will do the job just as well. Open it out. Now, potatoes like really rich soil. So a general purpose compost will do the job, but if you can improve it with some soil improver, or if you have got some garden compost of your own, that definitely will improve the crop. So that is no more than 1/3 full, but of nice, rich compost. You'll need some seed potatoes, and I've got here some first earlies. This is Duke of York. Good, reliable grower, and you can see that they have a shoot on it. But if it hasn't got any shoots, that doesn't matter either. You can still plant it. Now, in a bag that size, I only need 1 or 2 seed potatoes. If I grow it with 1, I'll get bigger spuds as a result. If I put 2 in, I'll get more smaller ones. So you can, depending what you want. In fact, I'm going to bag up 2, 1 with 1, 1 with 2, and we'll compare the results when we come to harvest time. And simply pop it in the centre of the bag. So we will cover that up with soil, like that. So the seed is covered, but there's plenty of room to put more soil in, because what we'll do is, as it grows, we'll keep topping the soil up until the soil level is nearly at the top of the bag, and then the foliage will come out the top, which means there's a nice deep area of goodness for the roots to get to, and we'll get more tubers as a result. So all we need to do now is to put this somewhere sheltered. If you've got a greenhouse, that's brilliant, but anywhere where it's out of cold wind and it's a little bit warmer than if it's grown in the soil. Water it, not so it's sodden, but so it never dries out. And by the way, as it grows, it will need quite a lot of water. Right, that's a single one. I'm now going to do one with 2 potatoes. So we'll pop them in spaced evenly. Cover them up. I'll just pop those there for the moment. Give them each a little bit of water. Now, Easter time. Time to plant potatoes. Time to go shopping for plants. And most people this weekend will be buying bedding. Millions of bedding plants are sold over the Easter holiday weeks. Now, you may wonder where they all come from. And Joe has been to find out.
This is one of the UK's largest growers of plants. They're located on the Chichester Plain, where the quality and quantity of sunshine are the highest in the UK. And that means that top-notch sun-loving plants can be grown quickly and with maximum energy efficiency. I've been given a chance to look behind the scenes of this huge operation that supplies nurseries, garden centres and DIY stores with a constant supply of ornamental protected plants. Full-on, bright, colourful, in-your-face bedding. The glass houses cover thousands of square metres, in excess of 65 million plugs, 5.5 million bedding packs and another 4.5 million individual pots are produced annually. Alex Newey is the managing director and has an overview of the whole business. Alex, this is a very impressive operation you got here, but what I'm really interested in is who calls the shots about what you're growing.
Ultimately, it's the consumer. The consumer decides what they want to buy. I think you've got perhaps two different types of gardener. You've got the very experienced gardener who might go out and buy what they've always bought, but equally they're not afraid to experiment either. And then you've got the newer gardener or the novice gardener. They're looking for new things. They're not so set in their ways. They can buy new plants and have tremendous success with them. And over time, that may reshape what we're selling. When we put something in the market and it's a new product, it's got to be brilliant. It's got to look fantastic. And it's got to be trendy.
It's got to be trendy. Now, hang on a minute. What do you call trendy?
Buying a blend of products that looks interesting and different. Might be a mix of bedding and some other things as well. Maybe you mix some bedding with some herbaceous or a bit of tropical or whatever it might be. That is trendy. There is no set way of doing it. Feel free to go out and do it the way you want to do it.
Now, I'll have to admit, I am not the biggest fan of bright pink polyanthus. I mean, they're a little bit leery, aren't they? Perhaps a bit too traditional. But they do a great job of greening up our cities, and we'd certainly miss them if they weren't there. Now, of course, these guys want you to buy as much bedding as possible, but my advice is when you go to the garden centre, just try and stay focused. Don't run around like a kid in a sweet shop picking every single colour out. For me, this is a little bit too much. Lots of different colours clashing together. In fact, they're fighting with each other rather than being complementary. Oh, now, this is my sort of thing. It's cool whites and blues and purples all working together in quite an understated way. And they're complementing each other. It's a restricted palette which produces a strong colour theme. I know, everyone loves bright colours though, and I am not the style police. But my tip to get the most out of them is to pick two opposite colours and keep it quite simple. I mean, look at this blue and the yellow. They intensify each other. And the great thing about bedding is it's fun, it's not very expensive, you can personalise your garden, and if you don't like it, change it as the season comes on.
Well, there's no question that whatever you think about mass production of plants, it is incredibly impressive. And people do buy lots and lots of bedding. But not all of it is ready to be put into the garden now, even though it's on sale at your garden centres. Some of the tender plants really will suffer terribly and may even die if they go out, even if there isn't a frost. Now, I've got a couple here. I've got some Sophinias and some Calliabracheas. And you can see that they're sold in trays, that sort of size, small plants, perfectly healthy, but that would struggle in our wet, cold soil, particularly if we have some frosts. So I'm going to pot them on. And I've got a potting mix which is just general purpose compost with a little bit of our own compost and sieved leaf mould in it. And I just take it out of the container like that. And this is the Callibrachia, which has got really dark, almost black petals, which will be brilliant for the jewel garden, particularly in the pots, and just pop it in like that. And now with some protection, all I have to do is just keep them watered, and they should grow perfectly happily. So I'm going to pop these in the greenhouse. Now, these don't need any extra heat over and above the protection of the greenhouse. I'll water them in and keep them reasonably watered. And before planting them out, I will make sure that I harden them off for a couple of weeks. These won't be planted out until May at the earliest. Now, even if you don't grow bedding plants, here are some other jobs you can do this weekend. Although it's a good idea to leave the dried stems and seed heads of herbaceous perennials over winter, because that provides cover and food for insects and birds, it's now time to cut them back and remove everything, exposing the new shoots of this year's growth. Dahlia tubers are on sale now, but they do sell out quickly, so it's worth buying them now and make sure that you get nice, plump, firm tubers. Put them into a pot with plenty of potting compost, water them well, and put them somewhere protected to grow into young plants, which can then be put into their final position after the last frost. Easter is when many of us get the mower out and cut the grass for the first time. Resist the temptation to cut too hard too soon. Lift up the blades on your mower and just give it a light trim, and repeat this for the next few weeks until the grass is growing strongly. Of all the flowers that are appearing in the garden this spring, none are more exotic than the snake's head fritillary, but it is a native. This is a plant of damp meadows, and it loves this part of the spring garden because it floods. And it's called snake's head because you can see that before the flower head opens, it has the shape of a snake's head. And then when it does open, it reveals this amazing checkerboard pattern. Occasionally you get white ones through, and of course they don't have that same pattern. I much prefer the traditional straightforward fritillaria. But if you want real exotica, particularly at this time of year when it still can be pretty cold, then you need to look at plants that come from the other side of the world. And we went to Burnham Nurseries in Newton Abbot in Devon to see a wonderful collection of orchids.
What draws people is their huge diversity. There's so many different shapes and sizes, colours and patterns. Really, there's something for everybody within the orchid family. My grandfather started growing orchids back in the 20s and 30s, and our nursery really grew from there. We're now in our third generation of our family to grow the orchids. And we're certainly very passionate about it as a family, yes. Many years ago, the Victorians were growing orchids in their stove houses, on big estates with their gardeners. Modern hybrids are many generations now removed from the original species, and the more you breed with these orchids, you get more hybrid vigour, and that just makes a stronger, easier plant and more free flowering and more colours and more varieties available. Generation after generation, they get that little bit easier to grow. People get bitten by the orchid bug very easily these days. They're perhaps given a gift of a beautiful orchid like a Phalaenopsis that will flower all the year round and like to live like we do, nice and warm and cosy. So the Phalaenopsis, or moth orchids, are probably the most popular orchid grown as a houseplant in the world today. But probably where people go wrong the most is getting the watering balance right. You should always water them from the top and let them drain through, give them a good soak, and then allow them to dry out well before you water them the next time. The roots should be a kind of silvery grey colour when they're dry, and then they turn green as you water them. And if they've gone brown, then that's too wet for too long and they've rotted. And we've actually got some plants here today which have got similar sort of watering balance problems. The first thing we're going to do is to remove the cane and the clips from the dead flower stem, and we're just going to trim the flower stem right off at the bottom, pull it out of the pot. We can see this plant has not got a very good root system. It's lost most of the roots because it's been kept too wet. So we're going to trim these back just to leave a nice anchor of roots. You want to either clean your pots and sterilise them, or use a new pot. It just needs new compost to make new roots. We're going to add just a handful of polystyrene chips in the bottom, which just helps to give a little bit extra drainage, a nice layer of air in the base to allow the roots to dry out. Then we're going to take a nice handful of bark, pop that in the pot, and then centre the plant in the middle of the pot, position it so it's upright, pushing it gently but firmly, top it up with a little bit more, and now we've ended up with the plant just sitting on the surface of the compost, which is just below the rim of the pot. We want to give this a good water now. We also want to spray the plant to encourage new roots to grow, and that humidity is really important. Phalaenopsis are really warm growing, but there's lots of other orchids that you can grow that like it really cool. Like, for instance, the dendrobiums or the cymbidiums, liking to drop down to about 8 or 10 degrees on a winter's night. That cool drop in the winter helps them to grow well and helps them to come into flower well year after year. They love to stand outdoors in the summer, somewhere shady, somewhere sheltered, out of the bright sun so the leaves don't get burnt, and they'll grow their new leaves all throughout the summer months and then flower again in the winter. These orchids are a little bit different to Phalaenopsis. They have a type of bulb, which we call a pseudobulb. The dendrobium has tall, narrow ones. The cymbidium has short, fat, round ones, but they're full of water and food, supporting the plant and giving it the energy to grow more year after year. Each year they make new ones. This one has got new shoots coming here, which is going to make the new tall bulbs, which are going to be the ones that produce next year's flowers. The old ones never flower again, but they stay on the plant as a food support system, giving the plant the energy to do more growing and more flowering in the future. People don't realise that the orchid family is actually huge. It's the largest group of flowering plants in the world. There's about 30,000 species. Orchids are great survivors. They will cope with all sorts of conditions in their own natural habitats. And the modern hybrids have been bred to cope with our natural habitats, our homes. Just follow a few simple rules and you'll get so much enjoyment.
My father always grew an orchid or two on the mantelpiece, I remember, this exotic plant in our house. In fact, I went once to the National Botanic Garden in Singapore, which of course is famously full of thousands of orchids, an amazing sight. But you know, at this time of year, I think nothing captures the spirit of the season better than a daffodil, and my favourite of all those is the wild native daffodil, Narcissus pseudonarcissus. And I planted the bulbs about 15, 20 years ago, and it's just beginning to mass up and looks delicate and yet filled with light. But talking about light, don't forget that the clocks go forward this weekend. So as well as Easter, with the extra day off, we've got extra light to enjoy as well. Have a great time, and I'll see you back here at Longmeadow next week. Till then, bye-bye. Come on, Oaks.